The college football playoff is set. We have games coming up on the 19th and 20th for the first round. A couple good games and a couple of matchups with some, let's just say, heavy favorites. But we'll quickly break down all four, including what the best bets are for each of these. Ninja here with Josie Costigan. Hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on so you do not miss anything from the college football playoff. If you're looking for a game in particular, you can check the chaptering down below, but we'll just rip through these, Josie, and I'll start with James Madison at Oregon. A lot of viewers may not know anything about JMU. What can you tell us about the Dukes, and what do you expect them to bring to the table against Oregon at Autzen Stadium? I mean, this is a team that was a 24.5-point fave in the Sun Belt Championship game. Just the one loss, and that was at Louisville. But what else do you have about this team?
Yeah, I'm going to try to scrape up all the positive things I can say about the Dukes here. I'm going to say that they're going to really try to grind the game out. Their defense is good. You know, they are second in the country at stopping the run, and, you know, they're holding teams under 16 points a game, but most of that came against, you know, Sun Belt teams. So on offense, you know, I think, you know, Wayne Knight is really good. He has over 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, you know, and their quarterback also, you know, is very mobile too. They like to control the clock, you know, second in college football, over 34 minutes a game. The only problem here is that Oregon is just better, and the Ducks are just going to pull away once they get rolling. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll get to your pick here in a moment. And I have a hunch about where you're at for this game. And James Madison only here because of freakishly lucky auto bid format where Duke had won the ACC. But, you know, do they actually stand a chance here? Or is this just a scrimmage for the Ducks? Because personally, I see 21.5 on the board, and I'd be willing to easily take Oregon more points than that. But can they make this competitive?
No, I just think the level of competition JMU has faced is way below what Oregon brings to the table. You know, Louisville was basically their only test, and even in that game, they got absolutely handled, you know, 28-14. I just think the Ducks are really fast. You know, they have a deep roster, you know, top 10 offense and defense in the country. So, you know, the Dukes might, let's be nice here, they might get a few nice moments, you know, long drives, maybe a big run from Wayne Knight, like I was just talking about, maybe some time-consuming possessions, because I can see them trying to hold on to the ball as much as possible. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to see this being a real contest. It's kind of just like a joke to me.
Do you think, you know, not that Oregon needs much more of an advantage, but do you think home field is going to play a big factor here, just because JMU wouldn't have seen anything like this? So how much of a factor do you think that will play?
Yeah, the Ducks are they're 19-1 in their last 20 home games, and their only loss this season was to Indiana. So, you know, I can get that. I'll give you credit there. So I think they thrive in this environment. You know, on top of that, Oregon has been favored by 20 plus points at home 5 games this season, went 4-1 against the spread in those games. So they're not strangers to these lofty spreads. And like you said, for JMU, they're used to small crowds. So it's going to be a really big shock. I would expect some communication issues there. And, you know, a team that's right on its heels from the start. So yeah, they'll probably panic a little.
I personally love Oregon here at 21.5. Minus 112, the juice over at DraftKings. The total 50.5 here. Obviously, the Ducks, a heavy money line favorite. What's your bet here?
Yeah, I can't believe in a CFP game I'd be betting a spread this large so confidently too. But yeah, Oregon at home at minus 21.5 is my play. They've proven they can handle spreads like this season. So I just don't see any world where James Madison finds any rhythm here. So yeah, give me Oregon.
Let's go to Alabama at Oklahoma now. A rematch, which we will talk about quickly here. You know, OU handed Alabama one of its losses this season. What can we sort of bring or learn from that 23-21 Sooners win into this game?
Yeah, that first game is definitely something to keep in mind, because it shows that Oklahoma can hang with Alabama here. And, you know, the Sooners scored, 17 points off turnovers that day. So for this rematch, turnovers are huge. I think Oklahoma needs to create mistakes to have a real shot again. You know, that was the big difference maker in that first matchup. You know, the defensive pressure matters. The Sooners, you know, really can disrupt Ty Simpson. And, you know, we've seen him kind of be disrupted a lot throughout the season. So I think they'll try the same things again. Though Alabama might be better prepared this time. I think it's going to be close too. That 23-21 finish shows that this is probably going to be, a low scoring, tight matchup. So I'd expect another game where, one or two big plays really swings it. But yeah, basically, I think Oklahoma proved they can already win here. But, also too, we can't ignore Alabama's growth since then.
Well, that's a perfect segue because statistically in that first meeting, like Alabama did everything right in that game. But like you said, it was the turnovers that played such a massive part in Alabama letting that game slip away. So since then, has Alabama learned anything in the few weeks since that result, to get them in a better spot? Because they did not particularly look good in that SEC championship game in particular.
Yeah, like again, Alabama was fine statistically in that first matchup. They had nearly double the amount of total yardage in that game compared to Oklahoma. But again, it was the 3 turnovers that killed them. And then you have a team like Oklahoma who's going to make the most of every mistake. And I think that has been the story for the Tide in crunch games this season. If they can limit their mistakes, they usually win. If not, they're very vulnerable. And since that Oklahoma game, Alabama's kind of been up and down still. They barely handled Auburn. And then, they got blown out by Georgia in that SEC title game. And again, 2 turnovers there. So, I think the SEC championship showed maybe they haven't fully figured it out yet. The offense is still a little bit of a problem. I don't think Ty Simpson has been flawless this season, especially under pressure. So I think if they can cut down on the turnovers and execute in key moments, they're in a better spot than last time. But that is a very big if.
What do you know about some of the injury concerns that Alabama has sort of accrued in, the back half of the season here? There have been concerns with, Justin Jefferson at linebacker, Xavier Brown at corner, but then guys that sort of missed that SEC championship game, Miller, Cuevas, and a few others. What do you know about the injury front for the Tide here?
Yeah, something to keep an eye on too. They're saying Jam Miller might be back, so that's one positive uptick. But yeah, a few defensive linemen are probably going to be limited. And that matters because, Oklahoma's defense thrives on stopping the run and creating turnovers. So any drop-off in Alabama's, offensive weapons or pass protection could really make it harder for Ty Simpson to get into rhythm. And we've already seen he can, his knees can knock a little bit. And again, on defense too, missing players means a lot less pressure on John Mateer. So obviously, the injuries aren't the end of the world, but in a game like this, even a small weakness can really make the difference.
It's one of the 2 interesting sort of first round games we have as I look at DraftKings. Oklahoma plus 1.5 home underdogs here. The total low, like you alluded to, it's 40.5. The over minus 112, minus 112 for Alabama on the money line as well. Some, a few decent looking betting options for this one, at least, and a much more entertaining game than the one that we just talked about. But what's your play here?
Yeah, this is where I think your betting expertise can kind of come into play, and you can maybe practice those a little bit. I'd go with the under here, but I'd maybe wait, see where the sharp money goes, see if that total, goes up or not. Maybe look for an alt total at around, maybe a 41.5, 42.5, just to give you a little bit of breathing room. Because I think neither team has been great at scoring lately, and Oklahoma's defense is super tough again, especially against a run. Again, Alabama's offense hasn't looked that sharp, so I think the big plays might be hard to come by, and especially with Simpson having, a history of turnovers, I don't see them looking for those big chunk yardage plays. So with both teams likely getting to get long drives, I just think that this one could stay under that 40.5 region pretty easily.
Let's move over to Tulane at Ole Miss. This is the head coach left us bowl. Some are all going to Florida, but at least he's coaching in this one. Kiffin already at LSU. Which team do you think has more or can use that as a rallying spot? With Kiffin basically abandoning Ole Miss, some are all leaving, but still coaching this game. Who can motivate from that a bit more here?
I love games like this because it just goes to show, especially in the betting world, there's things outside of analytics that you need to look at. And this is something that's a good example. I think Tulane definitely has a better rallying point here. Like you said, Summerall might be on his way to Florida, but at least he's still being decent at coaching this game. So the players still get that sense of, continuity. One more shot with the guy who led him to, the AAC title. Ole Miss, yeah, different vibe. It's just like Kiffin just bounced after the Egg Bowl. And, even though I think the team likes, Pete Golding, it still feels like the head coach just dipped you. He just ghosted you, right before the biggest stretch of the season. So that's really hard to rally around. It's like a sudden change of voice and style right before the playoff. So I think Tulane's situation feels more unified. while Ole Miss is kind of like, all right, like what now? So yeah, I think the talent gap still leans towards the Rebels, but in terms of like maybe emotion and focus, I think Tulane has the edge for me. Yeah.
Talent gap, I mean, definitely in Ole Miss's favor. And one thing we do know is that these two met way back earlier in the season, with Ole Miss absolutely cruising to a victory. Trinidad Chambliss especially was excellent in that football game. Can we expect that same sort of result here? Or, will Tulane compete and maybe keep it inside, or keep it competitive at least?
Yeah, I think Chambliss can absolutely put together a really solid game here. I think the matchup leans his way heavily. Last time threw for, over 300, ran for 100. And Lacey, Q1 Lacey, he chipped away all season. So Ole Miss dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides, and Tulane never settled in. Like you said, though, at least this time Tulane is playing better football. They tightened up defensively down the stretch. They've leaned harder on their run game, and Retzlaff, he's been more mobile lately, so that gives them an edge that we didn't see in September. So yeah, I think Chambliss should still play well, and Ole Miss should control most of the game, but Tulane isn't, showing up as clueless and lost as they were in September. I think they've settled. They've cleaned up some of their issues that got them, blown out the first time. It should be closer, even if the outcome stays the same.
And, it's no coincidence that their coach that established this competitive and scrappy program is going to a bigger school.
Yeah.
Tulane has been good the past few years, but again, we're seeing a lofty spread here, 17.5 points at Ole Miss. The total, high one here at 56.5. Either side of that, minus 110. What's your bet for this one?
Yeah, like I said, Tulane's playing much better. Tighter defense, stronger run game, more confidence in their quarterback. So I think Ole Miss might be scrambled without Kiffin. So there's several reasons why I would maybe want to stay away from that spread. Just from like an inside the locker room perspective, I don't know what the play calling is going to be like. I don't know if that's going to affect them. I don't even know if, the pre-game, post-game speeches are going to affect them differently. 7 of the last 8 games, Ole Miss was favored by 17.5 points or more. They stayed under. So I'm going to go under 56.5 here.
We'll get to the last one and maybe the best game of this lot in a moment. But folks, celebrate the holidays and get Prop Professor for 50% off for the first month right now. This app drops hundreds of plus EV bets every single day, gives you a real shot at finding long-term profit, and you can sort through plays across college football, across the NFL, and plenty more. There's a great arbitrage tool here. There's a great fantasy optimizer as well, and it's easily the best bang for buck app on the market compared to its competition. And you can use the promo code SHARK50 at checkout and get 50% off that first month. All right. Let's finish things off here with the best game of the bunch, at least in my humble opinion. Miami heading to Kyle Field. It's going to be insane. This is going to be, Josie, the toughest environment Miami has played in, and against probably the toughest pass rush that they've played against. One thing I will say is that if there is anyone that would maybe be used to this sort of environment, it is Carson Beck. But let me ask you this. Is Carson Beck and is this Miami Hurricanes team ready for both this matchup and this environment?
Yeah, I think Miami's definitely stepping into the deep end here. I think Kyle Field, like you said, is definitely one of the toughest road environments to play in college football. Beck has been sharp lately. I don't want to say it. 10 touchdowns, just 1 interception his last 4. But like you said, A&M's pass defense is allowing, almost under 180 passing yards per game. So this is going to be really tough for him. I look at Miami on the road in Florida State and SMU this year, and I'm just really not convinced that they're going to walk into Kyle Field and have an easy time. And let's not forget, I think we were all surprised that Miami even snuck into the CFP. So I don't know if they necessarily had all the time to prepare, mentally prepare. And like you said, they're the ones who get to walk into Kyle Field. Yeah, it's going to be tough for sure.
Let me ask you this, because this is the first game of that Saturday. And is the 11 a.m. local kickoff time going to be a problem for either of these teams? Or should this even be a concern for bettors at all? Like maybe some early rust or anything like that?
I wouldn't say it's a huge concern. I expect both teams to probably be practicing and preparing for that anyways. And it's not like it's a cross-country flight. Miami's coming from the East Coast. It's only, 2-hour difference. Texas A&M plays most of its games, in the SEC on varying times too. I think early rest might be a tiny factor in the first quarter, with players' game day routines kind of being a tad thrown off. I know that's a thing, just dating an athlete. But bettors shouldn't overthink it from an overall game perspective. But I think if you're, looking at first quarter spreads or totals, then yeah, maybe it's something worth thinking about there.
Miami all season long, sort of always in that convo about being one of the better, more complete teams in the country. But this 4-game run that they are on since the SMU loss is probably some of the best football that they've played. And you've already talked about some of the Beck stats. So is Miami peaking here at the right time?
Yeah, I think Miami's timing couldn't be better. Since that OT loss to SMU, they're 4-0, scoring 34 or more points in each game, allowing just 10 points per game in their last 3. I think they're really clicking on both sides of the ball, and you can definitely argue that they're peaking at the right time for a playoff run.
Yeah, and like I said, in my opinion, the best game of the 4, even better than Alabama OU. So as we sit here now at DraftKings, A&M 3.5-point home faves. We talked about the environment. It's going to be insane at Kyle Field. The total is 51.5, either side at -110. A&M -180 on the money line. Hurricanes coming back as +150 money line dogs. What's your pick here?
Yeah, they may be peaking, but they're not winning. So I gotcha. You thought I was saying something nice about the team that stole Notre Dame's spot, but no. This is the toughest opponent the Hurricanes have played all season, and it's not even close, honestly. Notre Dame in week 1, yeah, you could say that, but you got to look at the context there. That was a freshman quarterback's debut on the road in Miami, and even that was only a 3-point win, so I'm not giving him any credit there. Like you said, the home field advantage in the balanced offense. Texas A&M is 7-0 at Kyle Field this season. They're 2-5 against the spread. That record includes them as some pretty huge favorites. So, it's a tad underwhelming there. But, they moved the ball well through the air, over 250 passing yards on the ground, almost 200 rushing yards. Defensively, they're in top 20 total defense. So, even if Miami keeps this close, I just think A&M's balance, home crowd, it just gives them the edge in a tight game. So -3.5 feels very, very doable for me.